All right, good morning, everyone. By our clock, it's 10 a.m. So I'd like to thank you for tuning in to the next installment of the Active Transportation Resource Center's webinar series. My name is Victoria Custodio, and I'm part of the Active Transportation Resource Center's team. I'll be facilitating the webinar today, which is entitled Active Transportation Safety and Encouragement Campaign Resources, an in-depth look at the Go Human campaign. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Okay. Before we begin with our presentations, I have a few introductory slides. I'll begin by briefly reminding folks about the Active Transportation Resource Center, which is also referred to as the ATRC. So the ATRC is a statewide effort of the Active Transportation Program, and it's administered by Caltrans, which has been, and the ATRC has been set up to provide support to local agencies throughout California with the delivery of their ATP awards. The ATRC also provides resources and assistance to non-ATP awardees as well. So I'm happy to say that the ATRC utilizes a combination of experts, of subject matter experts from state agencies, such as the California Department of Public Health, which is where I'm based, and the team that's facilitating this webinar is based, universities, and other consultants. And then lastly, the ATRC provides active transportation training, tools, resources, and technical assistance, both on infrastructure and non-infrastructure project types. So very briefly, we do have a website, and the address is below. Right. We have a great pair of presentations today from two wonderful speakers. First, we'll hear from Lindsay Hansen, who is a Community Engagement Specialist at the Southern California Association of Governments, or also known as SCAG, and she's going to give us an in-depth picture of SCAG's Go Human campaign and all of its vital components. Next, we'll hear from Renee Yarnall, who is a Community Development Manager at the City of San Jacinto in Riverside County. And Renee will follow up Lindsay's presentation and share how the City of San Jacinto has applied the Go Human campaign to serve their city's unique transportation planning and community engagement needs. And again, my name is Victoria Custodio, and I'll serve as the facilitator for our Q&A, which will follow immediately after the presentations, and then I'll also wrap us up at the end of the hour. And along those lines, please know that we're using WebEx system today, and so if you have any questions that you would like to ask our presenters, we encourage you to use the chat function, and when we get to the Q&A section, we'll be able to go through those, and it always is helpful to have a few questions in advance to kick us off. Right, next slide, please. Okay, very briefly, this next slide establishes the learning objectives that we set for those of you who are listening in today. And simply put, we hope that as a result of this webinar, you'll understand the components of the Go Human campaign, learn the effectiveness of campaigns like this one, and pop-up events that occur in conjunction with these events, and what they do to encourage active transportation, and then finally, how you can apply Go Human strategies in your own community. All right, and this is my last slide before I'll kick it over to our wonderful presenters. Quickly, we'd like to survey who's on the webinar with us today, and we'd like you to respond to the two following polls. So the first one is just to indicate which field you work in. And our options here are engineering, planning, public health, law enforcement, and other. And actually, if you do respond to other, why don't you go ahead and just send a note in the chat function as well to let us know which field you do represent. It's always helpful for us to know that detail. And then secondly, and this is really helpful for Lindsay, are you from a Southern California Association of Governments county? So that would include Imperial, Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, or Ventura. Yes or no? I'll give the poll responses about, I'll give you about a 15 seconds, 20 seconds. I want you to move fast to give your response, and then we'll give that information to Lindsay and Renee so they have it, and take them off in just a minute. All right, so I'm not seeing any motion. So very quickly, for our wonderful presenters, we have a good number. Our largest group is from the planning community, about 42%. We have, after that, we actually have non-responders, so hey, that's not cool. All right, so we've got mostly planners, and then after that we have not really major distinctions between other engineering, public health, and then happy to see a few law enforcement colleagues on the phone as well. Thank you for the others. We've got some folks that are marketing and behavioral science, which is great. And then Lindsay and Renee, just so you know, 56% of the attendees are actually not from the SCAG counties. Okay, so let's close those polls. And on that note, let's see if I can get back to the slide so that I can advance it. Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, Lindsay. So, Lindsay, you should be unmuted. Can you let us know that you're ready to go?
Good morning.
Wonderful. All right, take it away, Lindsay.
All right, great. Thank you, Victoria. I'm Lindsay Hansen, a Community Engagement Specialist on the Active Transportation and Special Programs team here at SCAG. Like Victoria mentioned, SCAG is the MPO for 6 counties in Southern California. We cover Imperial, Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura counties. So on the next slide, before I dive into the details behind Go Human and how to use it, I wanted to provide a little background information about what the Go Human program is and why SCAG developed it. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, there we go. So these numbers are from our Transportation Safety Report, which was published last year. The report contains a lot of great information about transportation safety in the SCAG region, but there are a couple of numbers in particular that I want to point out. On average, 1,500 people die every year from collisions in our region, which is more than 4 people every day. And I also want to note that most of the collisions in our region occur on local roads, not on freeways. All right, next slide. So to address these numbers, SCAG launched the Go Human program using grant funding from the statewide 2014 Active Transportation Program. And the goals of the campaign are listed here. The goals are to reduce collisions and create safer streets, encourage people to walk and bike more, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve public health, support the ATP and active transportation investments throughout the region, and ultimately to change the reputation of the region. So on the next slide, you'll see that we have a multifaceted approach to achieving those goals. Our approach includes region-wide advertising, co-hosting open streets and temporary demonstration events, pursuing partnerships and co-branding opportunities with local governments and nonprofit organizations, and material distribution to help raise awareness of traffic safety issues at the local level. And so far, using those strategies, we have achieved nearly 1 billion impressions to date. And for the non-marketing folks on the phone, an impression is each time that an ad is seen or heard. So to date, we have had 3 rounds of Go Human advertising, with the most recent campaign wrapping up in August. Our advertising mainly targets drivers, reminding them to look out for people walking and to give space to people riding bikes. But we do also have advertising that targets bicyclists and pedestrians. And those ads mainly remind them to ride in the direction of traffic or go with the flow, as we say, or to cross the street at intersections or crosswalks. Our 2018 campaign was split into 2 phases. The first phase ran in May and focused on bicycle safety to coincide with National Bike Month. And the second phase ran from mid-July to mid-August, focusing on pedestrian safety, and that coincided with back to school and to combat an annual rise in collisions involving people walking. We used a variety of advertising tactics this year, listed here. Outdoor advertising was placed region-wide, and as you can see on this slide, we have a variety of ad messages. So what we did was use collision data on the street level to determine which message to display. So for instance, if the primary collision factor at a location where we had purchased a billboard was improper turning, then we would choose the message that says, "It's not just a sign, look for them before you turn." We also looked at other environmental factors, like whether a school was located nearby, to select advertising messages at each location. And finally, we evaluated demographic information and language preference at the zip code level to determine which language the ad appeared in and which models we used. So in addition to outdoor advertising, we also placed a variety of digital ads, social media ads, and traditional and streaming radio ads. So on the next slide, you'll see the key performance indicators that we've used so far. Primarily, we've evaluated the campaign based on the number of impressions and the advertising recall rate. And that recall rate measures just how many people remember seeing our ads, and we measured that through a survey distributed at the end of the campaign. So in 2018, we were able to achieve 375 million impressions, which was 125 million over our campaign goal. And I also want to note that more than 93 million of those impressions were added value, so they were provided at no cost to SCAG. And primarily, we achieved those through negotiations with the vendor. After our campaign ended, we conducted a survey of more than 600 drivers in the region. And through that, we learned that our advertising recall rate is remaining steady, with about 1 in 5 people in the region recognizing our ads. We would hope to see that number grow over time instead of remaining flat. So we're currently exploring strategies to improve the graphics and advertising strategy to boost that rate in the future. However, on a good note, we did learn through the survey that most respondents indicated that the advertising is motivating to them in terms of encouraging them to change their driving behavior. So we always like to see that. On the next slide, changing gears a little bit from the advertising campaign, GoHuman is designed to be a resource that can be customized for use by our member agencies. So part of our strategy involves partnering with local agencies, co-branding our materials, and selecting one of our messaging combinations that fits with that agency's needs. This usually involves SCAG covering the cost of printing, depending on our budget resources at the time, and our partners donating some sort of space, whether that is space for a bus shelter ad or maybe a billboard, or even just a fence to hang a banner or space for lawn signs. So through this strategy last year, we partnered with more than 50 organizations and achieved almost an additional 300,000 impressions. And that's just an estimate. It might have been a little more. We don't always have numbers for the donated advertising. All right, changing gears even more on the next slide. In addition to the advertising campaign, GoHuman also hosts events region-wide with cities or other local government agencies. So at these events, we temporarily set up infrastructure improvements that the city is planning to implement, like protected bike lanes, intersection improvements, curb extensions, just to name a few. It really varies depending on each event. And this gives community members a chance to provide feedback about the planned improvements and help inform the planning process. We work really closely with our city partners to help plan these events, and typically this includes putting together an outreach and community engagement plan, as well as identifying a brand for each event. And to do that, we use color combinations and illustrations that fit in with the overall GoHuman brand while also representing the particular community that the event is in. All right, and I think on the next slide, we've got a quick video to give you an idea of what's involved in the setup of the events. All right, So that might have been my connection was maybe a little bit choppy, but I think you get the idea that basically we just go out with some temporary materials, set up an event. You know, usually the event is one day, but sometimes we'll leave up the temporary infrastructure for longer so that we can get more feedback. And then it's all materials that are just pretty easy to then take away so that everything sort of goes back to normal. So far, we've hosted more than 40 events with more planned for 2019. Our performance metrics at each event vary slightly depending on the type of project that we're demonstrating and the goals of the city that we're working with. We do gather some high-level numbers shown here to help us measure the success of the program overall. Last year, we co-hosted 10 events with more than 10,000 attendees and collected nearly 1,500 surveys to help inform our city partners' planning processes. Separate of specific event goals, we tend to see that our events inspire people to get out in their communities and walk and bike more. And the events tend to draw a new audience that can be hard for cities to reach through more traditional community meetings or open houses. I will share some numbers on the next slide to give you a quick idea of the types of event-specific feedback that we gather. So these numbers are from Explore Merrimack, which we co-hosted in Costa Mesa in April of 2018. We hosted this event through a partnership with Orange Coast College, and the demonstration featured buffered bike lanes and was displayed for a month. So we really widened the time frame that we collected feedback for this particular demonstration. The type of feedback that we receive usually helps cities make the case for funding permanent installation of these projects. So in this case, participants largely expressed support and the desire to make the improvements permanent. And they did indicate, as you can see from these numbers, that they would bike more if they had protected facilities to ride in. And this particular project is actually slated for implementation, I believe, this year. And they're taking into account, of course, all the feedback that we received at the event. So now I'm going to turn it over to Renee from the City of San Jacinto to talk a little more about her experience co-hosting their Go Human event.
Thank you, Lindsay. Can you hear me?
Yes. You sound great, Renee, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Hi, as mentioned, my name is Renee Arnell, and I am the Community Development Manager for the City of San Jacinto, and I also served as the city's project lead for the Envision San Jacinto Go Human project that we co-hosted with SCAG, this one-day event that occurred last year on September 29th. We were extremely pleased with the turnout and the feedback that we received from the one-day event. Next slide, please. So for our Envision San Jacinto Go Human project, we had set out event goals, what we wanted to accomplish for our pop-up one-day event. And the goals were we wanted at least 500 attendees. We wanted at least 100 surveys collected for feedback. We wanted more people walking and biking in downtown. We wanted to enhance our local economic development in downtown, showcase the creative placemaking, and transform Main Street into a temporary pedestrian plaza. And these goals were established by our advisory committee. So as part of our planning process, an advisory committee is developed. We meet 4 times throughout the planning period with SCAG, and for us, our advisory committee included city staff, SCAG staff, our school district staff, nonprofits, our police department, Riverside University Health System, and all of us worked together to really make this a great event for the community. Next slide. So for our event, the demonstration components included 9 creative crosswalks, parklet, interactive chalk art, curb extensions, placemaking, and play features. So we wanted to really get our community involved. So with the 9 creative crosswalks, we were able to get our school district to participate and create all 9 of the crosswalks to be installed the morning of the event. Students that attended the after-school programs at 9 of the schools worked on the crosswalks, and then we worked with them. SCAG actually supplied all the materials, and we installed the morning of the event. And so what was great about getting the schools involved is that it was another way to draw more of the community down to the event to experience what was happening in that 2-block event space. We also had the high school art club involved. They created a temporary mural for the event that was installed the morning of. Riverside University Health Systems, they provided the parklet experience, and our Mount San Jacinto College Art Club also participated by allowing for an interactive chalk art experience for anyone that was down at the event. Next slide, please. So another large component of the event, not only the demonstration elements like the infrastructure pieces, it was to have activities. We really wanted to set the stage for what an open streets concept would be like and give the public the opportunity to have an experience. So our team really planned to set up as much as we could within the 2-block event area. And one of our focuses of the project was to increase biking and doing it safely. So we had a bike rodeo at our event, and that was put on by the Green Coalition, which is one of our local nonprofits. And it was a great event. SCAG was able to also set up a rental bike station, which gave kids that may have came to the event without their bicycle the opportunity to rent a bike, complete the bike rodeo, and still be able to participate in that experience. They also did helmet checks, and we were able to give away 100 helmets and fit kids properly to the helmets. They did bike checks for kids that did bring their bikes. So it was a really great way to get kids excited about biking in their community. And we also wanted there to be a focus on fitness and health at our event. So we reached out to local studios. We involved a karate and gymnastics studio at our event. They had demonstration areas within the 2-block area where they would put on mini demonstrations throughout the day, and they also each put on a large performance at our main stage area for the public to see. We were lucky to involve Inland Empire Health Plan as part of our event. They provided one of their superheroes, Mighty Fitnessa, and she made a 2-hour appearance at the event. Her purpose is to motivate children to get off their devices and get fit. And one of our other partners, the Riverside Transit Agency, allowed us to have one of their buses on display for attendees to tour and gather information regarding riding the bus to those who are interested. So attendees were also able to experience what the bus system has to offer, so they were able to tour buses as well. And also in support of biking, the city received donations of 26 bikes and a razor that we were able to raffle off to attendees of the event. So getting more bikes out there, allowing our community to go out and bike and do it safely. And so next slide, please. So our event results. The city and our advisory committee were really happy with the results of the event. We had surpassed what we had planned to accomplish in the goals we had set out. We had doubled the amount of surveys collected. We had hoped to collect 100. We received 214, and we had a very large amount of attendees, much more than we had expected originally. And we had transformed Main Street into the pedestrian plaza that we had hoped to. We had that open streets feel for the public. We were able to showcase creative placemaking features and encourage more walking and biking in downtown. And so we were really excited about the turnout of that event. And one of the reasons I think we are able to get such a great turnout is when you work with SCAG on these projects, Lindsay had briefly mentioned it, the branding for these projects. And for ours, if you see the image to the very left, that's our actual survey, but there's an image that says Envision San Jacinto. It's a little bit hard to see, but the kids walking, the biking, the creative art crosswalks, in the image, they've even incorporated our main street downtown, and all of that is included on all of the posters and the mailers, and really branding this event, getting people excited to go and experience it, go downtown and see what the improvements could be down there. And so we were really excited to have them partner with us on this event, and we learned a lot. 99% of the attendees that were at the event are from San Jacinto. They want more bike lanes. They want separated bike lanes. They support more events on Main Street in that 2-block area that we had proposed as a pedestrian plaza. And they'd like to see, 90% of them would like to see these features permanently installed. So a lot of great feedback. Next slide. So the next steps, the city is currently in the process of our 2040 general plan update. The project should be completed within the next 18 months. And during this process, the concept of the pedestrian plaza will be looked at during the cost-benefit analysis. They will consider whether or not it makes sense, and the ways to implement the project would be explored during that period. And the creative art crosswalks, which received just a large amount of positive feedback, are an element that could be implemented when the funding to do so becomes available. And also, one of the great things about the Go Human Envision San Jacinto project is all of the survey results, using that information as support for future grant funding. All of the statistics that SCAG puts together from all of the collections, being able to use that as support for other projects. For instance, we just wrapped up our Trails Master Plan, which addressed trails throughout the entire city, and part of the survey shows that people want more bike lanes, and they want these protected bike lanes. And so we can use these survey results as we move forward trying to get additional grant funding for projects. And also, for us, the benefits of hosting one of these events is the most important, the community feedback. It also provides the opportunity to really experience the improvements. Even though they're temporary, you really get a great idea of what those improvements would be like, and obtain that feedback of whether or not the improvements would be supported by the community. And another thing is community involvement. Is, Lindsay mentioned, you're getting a population out and getting feedback from them who may not go to a typical workshop or respond to a survey. So it's really great to be able to get some meaningful feedback at these events from your community. And then if your agency does have the opportunity to co-host a Go Human event, I would suggest doing so. It's a great experience, and it's worth all of the time and effort to make it happen. We were hoping to show a really small video of our event, but there were some technical issues, so we're hoping that maybe a link will be provided that you'll be able to see that. So that is it for me, and I will go ahead and turn it back over to Lindsay to finish up hers.
Okay, great. Thank you, Renee. Can everybody hear me okay?
You sound great, Lindsay.
Okay, great. So now, since we've covered Go Human events and advertising resources a little bit, I wanted to share some of our strategies for funding the program as well. The campaign was initially launched, as I mentioned, using ATP grant funding, and grant funding has been the primary resource for us to be able to continue and expand Go Human. We've received grants from the Office of Traffic Safety's Bike and Pedestrian Safety Program, and those have really helped us maintain and expand all of our work. We have been fortunate to get grants from OTS in fiscal years 17, 18, and currently now we have another grant for fiscal year 19. And these grants have funded our advertising campaign, co-branding and materials distribution, and a couple of new elements that I'll explain in a little bit: the development of our kit of parts, and a safety symposium and workshop series. And we have also received grant funding from the Mobile Source Air Pollution Reduction Review Committee, which is a mouthful, also known as MSRC, and that has supported our event series. So on the next slide, in addition to grant resources, we have partnered with private companies whose goals align with ours. Recently, that has included AAA, Bird, and Lime, and these partnerships have typically taken the form of event sponsorships, where the partners have an opportunity to demonstrate their products or share safety messaging to help them reach their goals at our events. However, as I will explain on the next slide, our partnerships have also taken on different forms, like a recent partnership with Bird. Through that partnership, we were able to expand Go Human to include safety messaging for scooters, and we implemented a mini advertising campaign in West LA County to encourage safe riding and safe driving near scooters. The campaign just wrapped up in December, and if you're in the Los Angeles area, you might actually still see a couple of our billboards posted or our bus tail ads on metro buses driving around. We are currently in the process of considering where and how we might want to expand our scooter safety strategy. We have really seen a strong interest in scooter safety messaging from both our board members and management. And as I think probably everybody knows, as these scooters are being introduced in more places, we want to make sure that people know really how to safely use them and that drivers get used to seeing them on the road. Okay, next slide. In terms of some other new campaign elements, SCAG is striving to help cities evaluate and improve traffic safety through a leadership safety symposium in May, and that will be hosted in coordination with our annual General Assembly, and also through a series of sub-regional safety workshops and webinars. The safety symposium is targeting elected officials to make sure that they are aware of policy and implementation tools that can help improve safety in their communities. And the workshops really will provide more of an opportunity for teams of city staff to help learn more technical and in-depth information to actually implement safety improvements. The workshops will aim to help cities complete some sort of an action, like adopting a Vision Zero or Towards Zero Death strategy, implementing a public outreach or advertising campaign, or maybe developing an active transportation plan. We're still working out the details of all the content of those workshops. To help ensure that the symposium and the workshop series will contribute to future safety improvements, we also plan to launch a Go Human Safety Pledge element for local government agencies. This will likely consist of a menu of several possible pledges with varying levels of commitment and difficulty. And again, we're still sort of working out the details of what that will entail. But after taking a pledge, the cities will be able to register for the webinars and workshops for free, and they'll also receive some other benefits. Next slide, please. So in the next couple of months, SCAG is going to be launching a kit of parts strategy. So through this strategy, we'll make up a pop-up library of supplies available to partner cities throughout the region, and basically cities will borrow those supplies to help host their own pop-up safety event. The events will really be led by the cities, and SCAG will provide the pop-up materials as they are needed and available to help demonstrate temporary infrastructure improvements. We're also continuing to seek resources to help us maintain and expand the kit of parts beyond the term of our current OTS grant so that we can continue to offer this to member agencies. And on the next slide, looking a little further into the future, we are continuing to develop strategies to further help our member agencies implement active transportation projects. Some of the things that we are working on now are to seek funding to develop an infrastructure video series, platforms to help facilitate before and after data collection, and like I mentioned, continued kit of parts availability. So before I wrap up, on the next slide, I just want to quickly mention how organizations in our region can get involved with us directly. If you are interested in requesting co-branded materials, I encourage you to visit our website. It's gohumansocal.org, and there you can download and complete a materials request form. I did also include a link here, and that'll send you to our advertising campaign webpage. and there you can find the form. And you can also find some pre-made, ready-to-go resources like our radio spots and digital ads, where you can just download them and they're all ready to go. If you'd like to host an event using our kit of parts, I encourage you to actually contact me so that we can get in touch and talk about some of the details like timing and demonstration elements that you have in mind. But I did also include a link here to our events information page so you can get more information and view some of the reports from our previous events if you'd like to. Like I mentioned, we're still fine-tuning the details regarding our Leadership Safety Symposium and safety workshops and webinars, but more information will be available on those very soon. So finally, I just wanted to mention a few of our ongoing opportunities for involvement with GoHuman. We have a blog that we post to usually weekly, if not more frequently, and social media and a monthly newsletter where we try to highlight local efforts and share new funding opportunities. So we're always looking for projects and programs to highlight on all three of these platforms. So you can find us on social media under the handle GoHumanSoCal, or on the next slide is my contact information. And you can feel free to contact me if you have any questions or are interested in partnering with us on anything. All right, and that's all for me. Thank you very much.
All right, Lindsay and Renee, thank you so much. Two wonderful presentations, and we do have a good number of questions that are rolling in. And just as a reminder to those of you who are listening in, please go ahead and enter your questions. You can use the question and answer function, and there's also a chat function. So we're happy to take your questions either way. But I'm going to start with some, and one that just came in, which I think is actually, I'm going to give to Lindsay first, because it relates to some of your closing comments. So for those of us who are interested in hosting demonstration events outside of the SCAG region, what are some common sources for sources for materials or parts? Lindsay, if you can kind of speak to that, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. So we have really relied on consultants and nonprofit groups to help us build out the kit of parts, and we're actually working with somebody right now to do that. So off the top of my head, I don't have real specific direction, but the materials that we use for the events vary a lot, from like spray chalk to planters, bollards, pretty much anything that can be set up and taken down pretty easily and then just loaded in the back of a truck and taken off to a storage unit. But I would be happy to check and see if we have any specific sources for those materials and maybe send that information to Victoria.
That would be great. And if I'm remembering correctly, Lindsay, you do have a guidebook for setting up some of these demonstration events, right? So I don't know if you have sources for those materials within that one guidebook. We can look at that see if that might help answer the question as well. But yeah, we'll take whatever you have, Lindsay. These are great resources for everyone across the state. All right.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Victoria, thanks for mentioning that. Actually, if I can just really quickly, we do have resources on our website as well, and guidebooks and things like that, tips for hosting temporary demonstration events. That's all out on our website.
Okay, and what we'll do, for those of you who've never joined us on an HRC webinar call before, we do a post-webinar communication, and we will share the video that Renee sent to us, and what we unfortunately were not able to show as part of this webinar today, but we'll send that in the post communication as well as the guidebook, Lindsay. So if you can get that to us, maybe you're a good site within the SCAG page to get to the GoHuman resources, that would be helpful. We'll send it out to everyone. Okay, next question. Can we, and this is for both. I'll take it to Renee, but then Lindsay, if you can jump in since you have a lot of experience supporting these events. Roughly how long does it take to plan and implement a single demonstration event? So timeline, and then along those lines, if you could also talk about staffing for events, that would be helpful. We had that question here in Sacramento.
So as part of our event, we actually we tried to track staff time as much as we could, and you're looking at, and just internal staff, we, approximately 220 hours, just internal staff time. That doesn't include, all of the volunteers the day of the event, or the police department, the fire department, the health department, depending what kind of elements you have the day of your event. And I believe we kicked off in February, March, April, May. It was probably a 4 or 5 month process. So your committee, we met with SCAG, 4 times as a group, but myself as being the lead contact, you're talking multiple contacts throughout the week, especially as you get really close to that demonstration day, the pop-up event itself. You're looking at a lot of time that way. But staff time, your lead will spend the most time on the project, and then the day of the event and the day prior to the event, you'll have a lot of time spent by maybe your public works staff, the road closures and things like that, and coordinating with a SCAG for delivery of supplies and things like that, and then a really early morning, the morning of for us. But on SCAG's end, I'm not sure, they spend a lot of time on their end as well that we don't necessarily see on our end. So Lindsay, if you...
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit more. So from our end, we designate a project manager that sort of works as like a liaison on the project with the city, and we also set up an advisory committee, and that's usually comprised of different community members. I think Renee spoke to that in her presentation as well. So that advisory committee usually meets more than a few times leading up to the event and helps inform the direction. And where we can, we try to find partners to work with us on the events and offer volunteers to staff the event. For instance, I mentioned some of our funding from private partners. So we worked recently with like Bird and Bike Riverside on an event in Riverside. So part of that partnership involves them providing staff for the day of to actually help staff the event to make sure that everything goes smoothly. And then additional staff in terms of planning for the events, we have used graphic designers. We had a graphic designer this last year that was pretty much dedicated to branding and working on all the ads for these events. It can get a little bit time intensive. And then we also have some marketing folks that provide support in identifying an advertising strategy and working with each city to sort of refine that and come up with the best advertising methods to get people out to the event. And I will just also add that it really varies depending on the scope of the event and what you're trying to demonstrate. If there's smaller events that we do, certainly the San Jacinto event was a larger one, but we have done some smaller events, and then that's a little bit less intensive in terms of day of staffing.
Right. Perfect. Thank you. That was really really helpful, I think, for those that are considering doing this work in their own jurisdictions. We've got a question about evaluation and back to the advertising campaign. So, Lindsay, this one's specifically for you. In addition to impressions, have you done specific behavior-related data collection, especially for areas where you're promoting more biking or walking for transportation?
That's a great question. It's a little bit difficult for us to get those types of statistics and numbers. I would say that the closest that we come to that, since our advertising campaign is, region-wide, we're in all 6 counties, and there are key corridors that we identify to advertise just because they have high rates of collisions. So that's really where we want to get the messaging out. But otherwise, it's a very regional campaign. So at the end of the campaign, when we distribute our survey, we do ask a lot of questions in there as far as, like, is this advertising motivating to you to encourage you to drive more safely? you know, how aware are you of some of the traffic safety laws? So an interesting thing that we have found through that survey, unfortunately, year over year, is that people are not the most aware of some of the traffic safety laws as they pertain to bicyclists and pedestrians. Like, a lot of people are not aware that you need to give somebody riding a bike at least 3 feet of space when you're passing them. So it really is difficult for us to sort of pinpoint exactly how our campaign impacts a drop in collision rates. And it also just takes us a really long time to work through that data since we're such a large region. But that survey, the campaign survey, I think is the closest thing that we've really come to that. So we have really focused a lot on impressions and ad recall rate as the 2 key performance indicators so far. But I think we're starting to have discussions internally about, you know, how we do identify behavior change and maybe some other metrics that we can work towards aside from impressions.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And I'll just say from the state's perspective, we're always interested in these performance metrics as well. And so as you start to have regional conversations, if you can engage the state and the Active Transportation Resource Center specifically, we welcome you know, an invitation to be part of those discussions because we're having the same thoughts here. And for those of you that are asking these wonderful questions, you know, if you have expertise to share, both with the regions and the state, you know, we're here to we want to learn. We know that there's a lot of expertise that we haven't tapped yet. So please feel free to reach out with you know, your thoughts and of how you're, you know, capturing behavioral change, you know, behavioral change related to these efforts as well. We'll be very interested to learn from those of you that are specifically coming from behavioral science fields. Okay, so this relates to the evaluation components. So there's a question about how the surveys were distributed. And so, Lindsay, I'll ask you about the driver surveys, and then Renee, if you can talk about the surveys that you did for your event. Yeah, go from there.
Okay, I can speak to the driver survey. Sorry, okay. Renee. So we actually worked through a consultant who hired a research firm to conduct our post-campaign survey for us. So that was really helpful, but we made sure that we had responses from each of the 6 counties, and the number of responses were correlated to the population in each county. And then we also tracked language. So before we implemented the campaign, we measured how many of the people living in the SCAG region prefer to get their advertising in Spanish versus English, and that gave us a percentage. And so we used that same percentage when we were implementing the survey to make sure that, you know, Spanish-speaking residents were also represented, you know, relative to their portion of the population in the survey results. It was a relatively brief survey, I think maybe like 20 to 30 questions or so, and it was all implemented online.
Online, okay, great. Renee?
So for our event, the day of the event, we had a team compiled that was actually physically there approaching individuals attending the event, collecting all of the information. And so we had Go Human, SCAG had a booth set up at where we would call like your initial entrance into the event, and they had a booth where you could do the survey there, and then they also had a team of individuals throughout the event area collecting surveys that way as well, asking people to complete them, and then SCAG takes all of the surveys back with them, takes all of the information collected, and puts out a really great final report for the agency to have with the results of, that were collected from the day of.
If I can just add to that really quickly, that's pretty reminiscent of the way we handle the surveys at our events. You know, we always have printed surveys at the events. But as I mentioned in my presentation, we also have done some demonstrations in the past where, you know, we have the big community event on one day, but the demonstration stays up for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And in those cases, the cities sometimes will post a survey online that people can go out and find and respond to solicit feedback for longer than just the one-day event.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yeah. So then you're getting additional feedback for the after the event for the actual for the demonstration piece that you're actually looking to solicit additional community feedback on. That's wonderful. And you might actually have, I just think about some of the Open Streets events that I've attended and where there have been demonstration projects. And, you know, if you're there, especially with young children in tow, it might not be ideal to complete a survey as you're wrangling children and also trying to get them to learn bike safety in the built-in rodeos and things like that. So I think having something after the event is sounds like a wonderful way to get people to have the time to actually reflect back on what they're seeing and participating in. So. Okay, great. We've had some multiple questions about the kit of parts. And so again, you mentioned the rentals. I think Renee had mentioned rentals as part of the work. Are there loaner bikes and helmets as part of the kit of parts?
Lindsay, do you want me to talk about? So with us, SCAG partnered with Inland Empire Biking Alliance, and they actually came to our event and supplied those bikes for the rodeo. So they're not necessarily part of the Kicks. They were another nonprofit that partnered with the pop-up event in the whole process.
Okay. Perfect.
And yeah, that's how we typically handle it as well, as we try to sort of leverage our partners' resources because a lot of the local nonprofits that are out there doing bike rodeos on a regular basis have bikes that they can bring to these events. We do usually bring out some helmets though, just so that we make sure that we have plenty.
Perfect. Okay, and I am not seeing any additional questions come in through the chat or question and answer functions. I'll give folks on the call one more minute to kind of add in a question. We did have one more question in the room, and this one's for Lindsay. You talked about exploring new strategies to boost that 1 in 5 recall for the campaign. Just wondering if you might be able to speak to any of these other new strategies that you're considering beyond the billboards and the bus transit places and the radio ads. If there's more that we're not aware of that you guys are thinking about, we would love to hear about that.
Sure. We don't really have anything concrete at this point, but we have had some discussions, particularly when we wrapped up the last campaign and, we were looking at the numbers and the results and trying to think of how we can improve them a little bit in the future. And I think there were a couple of takeaways, one being targeting our advertising even further, which is a little bit difficult to do with something like radio advertisement where it just covers a larger area. But with digital or social media advertising anymore, you can get really targeted with that. So I think it's a matter of maybe honing in a little bit more on our target audience and, the key people whose behavior that we're trying to change through the campaign. And then we've talked a little bit about also updating our graphics so that maybe they're a little bit more like context specific. It gets a little bit complicated because we cover such a large region. So, if we were trying to add context visually into an ad in, say, Riverside, it probably looks different than it would in Ventura. So we don't have really a concrete strategy yet, but it's something that we're continuing to think about, and probably we will have more discussions as we look into more advertising in the future.
Very helpful. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's just really helpful to hear what direction that we're going. Okay, if I really want to thank everyone for their question and answers. We're going to move along because we're nearing the end of the hour. Okay, let me get back onto the slide so I can advance it. All right. I did want to, the Go Human campaign materials are absolutely wonderful. And I also want to highlight that here at CDPH we have one additional available campaign that you can access if this suits your local jurisdiction. It was a campaign that was funded again by our partners at the Office of Traffic Safety when CDPH actually had a standalone pedestrian safety program. It's called Walk Smart California. And just like Go Human, it also addresses driver speeding, distracted walking, and crosswalk safety. And we do have guides for how the campaign materials can be customized for local use. And if you'd like to access those materials, you can do that upon request and at our Active Transportation Resource Center general email address, which is atsp@cdph.ca.gov. And then I'll shift gears and wrap us up. Okay, we're having a little trouble advancing the slides. Okay, so here we go. All right, so your feedback is important. When we wrap this webinar up, we're going to send out a survey gizmo to all attendees, and we hope you'll use that to register your feedback on today's webinar. And then what we always do is ask if you also have interest in receiving any additional technical assistance from the Active Transportation Resource Center. So you can describe what it is you'd like us to assist you with, and we'll do our best to respond to those requests in a timely fashion and help you with your transportation-related questions. Next slide. And this is my final slide with Lindsay and Renee's and my contact information. I want to thank Lindsay and Renee for wonderful presentations, wonderful insight. We really, at the ATRC, can only do this work through the partnerships that we have with regions and local jurisdictions to highlight how we can transform our state and behaviors so that they're more healthful and more equitable. So with deep gratitude, Lindsay and Renee, I thank you. Please follow up with questions. I also want to give a shout out to the team here at the California Department of Public Health, specifically Marianne Hernandez, who did a fabulous job putting this together. So on that note, Happy New Year to everyone, and we look forward to our next webinar, which you can find on our website. So that's, again, the Active Transportation Resource Center website, and we'll be sure to get that address out to you as well. All right, cheers, and thank you, Lindsay and Renee.